Hey, you guys, welcome to Q&A. I'm Matt Lewis. I'm here with Pastor Steve Whinery, coming to you live from Calvary Chapel, Tri-Cities in Kennewick, Washington. If you have no idea what you're watching or what you just clicked on, this is a question and answer show we do here. And so if you have questions and questions for Pastor Steve regarding the Bible or the Christian faith, you can email behind me, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You can send a voicemail or text message to 707-872-7677. For you guys that are local and can attend our fellowship, have a couple announcements for you. Number one, starting for tonight, Wednesday night service, we have a guy named Bob Rucker, and he is an expert on the Shroud of Turin. And so tonight he's going to give a presentation on that. There's actually some cool things going on in the media with that, with AI stuff. And so he's a specialist in the field. What's his engineering field? Molecular.
You know what? I don't know specifically what it is, but he deals with the area that he's dealing with most often has to do with the physics that would be involved in leaving an imprint on the shroud, and also C14 dating.
Yeah. And so he's a guy that goes around the world when they meet to study the shroud. He goes over to Europe, and I think they're going to Australia and different places. So he's not just a guy, he's like a guy as far as that subject matter. So if you're interested in that, come on down, check it out. It's going to be a good time. And then for this week, for our Easter schedule, we have a Friday Good service at
Good Friday
service at 6 p.m. in our sanctuary.
And I don't know if the service is going to be good or not.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
Subject.
We'll see how the speaker does.
Yeah, we'll see how this guy, if it's good or not. But Good Friday was good for us regardless of what he says.
Exactly.
Comes out. And then for Easter, we have a 6 a.m. sunrise service. It's a fantastic time to come on out, see the sun rise up as the word's being taught. It's a really great setting. So dress, bring your blankets, 6 a.m. sunrise service. It's our outdoor amphitheater. And then normal 8:30, 10:30 service for Easter Sunday. It's going to be a great time. Invite all your friends and family. Most people are more open to these to Easter service than maybe would go to a normal church service, and so use that. Invite them. Everything else, we have a whole bunch of stuff going on. Get on our website, download our app, and there's stuff for everybody. And so I'll leave that there. Are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. In the Easter spirit, we have some questions that come up, and so let's bust out a couple of those regarding Easter. Here's one of them. Should Christians participate in Easter egg hunts or giving Easter baskets to their kids? And then maybe you can answer this while you're doing that. Is that a pagan thing to do, and is Easter a pagan holiday?
Well, in 1 Hezekiah chapter 1, you have the passage that says, "Thou shalt take Easter baskets and fill them with..."
Perfect.
There is no 1 Hezekiah. I'm just joking around. No, there's no Easter bunny in the Bible, and there are no Easter eggs in the Bible. They do come from pagan traditions. Like anything, I want to be careful with this in the sense of just being fair. The rabbit or the hare actually was an ancient symbol of life and rebirth. And it may have had something to do originally with the sexuality of rabbits and that kind of stuff. But you do find rabbits, basically engraving of rabbits on early Christian tombs.
Really?
Yeah. And so apparently somewhere back then, the believers, for example, the believers adopted the fish as a symbol of Christianity. Because the word fish is ichthus, and it's also the first letters of the word fish come from the phrase. What the Christians did was they adopted this. First letters go with the phrase, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. And so the fish was a symbol. And so apparently the rabbit was a symbol too. So
Okay, you're going to have to explain this because you ticked off every Ishtar Christian conspiracy theorist on YouTube. So
that's just the history. And so some early Christians put rabbits on their tombs. Okay, and so now, having said that, the whole tradition of Easter bunnies having, rabbits that have eggs, that came from German traditions. We got a lot of traditions from Germany, and even the term Easter, actually, that probably comes from Nordic. Ostern would be the name for spring. And there's a Nordic god, Oestra, and her name probably came from spring also, the term spring. So the word Easter isn't even in the Bible. And if you got a King James version, there's a passage in the book of Acts that talks about Easter. It's actually Passover, or Pascha in Greek. And that's talking about the Passover. It's not Easter, or what we would call Easter. Easter is different from Passover in that Jesus rose on the first day of the week, and originally what Christians, and especially Jewish Christians, would have done was they would have taken basically, most likely, the 15th. That was usually what it was, the 15th of the month called Nisan, but it's a lunar month, and so it ends up moving throughout the year. That's what happens with Passover too. Easter does too, but what the Christians wanted to do was keep Easter on Sunday. And so the rule for Easter is it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, which is March 21st. So full moon after March 21st, and then you're going to have the next Sunday be Easter. And so that's where Easter, the day, came from. That's why we celebrate it on the days that we do. And obviously that's going to move too. And that's why it does. But we wanted to keep it on a Sunday. As far as the rabbit thing goes, rabbits were a symbol of new life to pagans. And so were Easter, or so were eggs. And eggs are a little bit more not as radical necessarily as the whole rabbit thing is. There's a lot of sexual connotations to rabbits, and in a lot of paganism, you have a lot of sexual issues going on. But with the eggs, that was a symbol of new life also. And so it lended itself to the whole idea of Jesus rising from the dead and that kind of stuff. And so somewhere along the line, it got incorporated, and there you have that. Okay, now as far as its pagan roots, I celebrated Easter with Easter bunnies and Easter eggs for decades, for at least, 16 years before I became a Christian, and never thought about a pagan thing. Never, ever. And that kind of stuff. And so, when you're looking at this stuff, whether or not we should do these things, I think that you need to have some grace on people, because you walk up to a non-believer and say, hey, you're doing pagan stuff with bunnies and eggs. Well, no, they're not. They're just doing, what they know of as Easter and the traditions that they've got with bunnies and eggs, and they're not worshiping anything pagan. And so don't pop off like that. As to whether or not a Christian wants to celebrate those things, I have a break in my household. This is one of the places where my wife will not submit to me. And so I don't really care for the whole Easter bunny, Easter egg thing, because it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus. And so I'm like, whatever, I don't want to do it. It's a big mess, and my wife always makes me go out and hide eggs or whatever with her, and then I have to go out and find them, and usually I find them with my lawnmower.
Are they dyed eggs, or are they the plastic ones?
No, well, they're both.
Okay,
and that's really a joy when you hit something with your lawnmower that's a plastic egg and stuff. Yeah. So
full of coins.
Yeah, full of coins. That's really special. And in any case, obviously my wife likes those things, and so what I do is the whole time that my children were growing up and they ran around, I can't remember if we had baskets, but when they ran around with their baskets or whatever they had picking up their eggs, I would follow behind them going screaming, "Pagan, pagan, pagan." I actually did it. Joking around, but I would do that at times just because I'm a hilarious guy.
Yeah, you're a funny guy.
Yeah. And so absolutely right. Eggs and Easter bunnies, that is not, it doesn't have anything to do with the biblical story of Easter. Easter is about the resurrection of Jesus. And so one of the things about this, and one of the dangers that people who question whether or not we should be doing this kind of stuff, is that obviously Easter bunnies and Easter eggs have pushed out Jesus in the story.
Right.
And especially for non-believers, pushed out Jesus in the story. My wife, at one point, this is kind of a cool story. She was working as a waitress in a small cafe in Big Bear, California, and she told me she went to work that day, and she had a pen, like a button thing, that had on it, "He is risen," and obviously talking about Jesus. Went to work, and one of the other waitresses looked at it and said, "Who is risen?" And Bobby goes, "Jesus is risen." And then she's like, "Well, what do you got that on for?" "Because it's Easter." "What's Easter got to do with Jesus?"
Had no idea.
She had no idea. No idea. Can guarantee you she had an idea about bunnies and Easter eggs.
Yeah.
But she had no idea that Easter was a celebration of the resurrection of Christ. And so obviously Satan can use this stuff to squeeze Jesus out, and if he can, that's exactly what he'll do. But I just want to caution you, like when you're witnessing to people, don't come off as, you're just a sneaking pagan because you do that stuff. Most likely they're not running around, doing a pagan ritual at midnight and having fires and things like that. What they're doing is they're getting Easter baskets and candy and Easter eggs because they think it's fun. And so informing them that the real fun about this is that if you follow the one who rose from the dead, you'll be going to heaven. That's going to be really fun.
Amen.
And so that's where I would keep the emphasis.
So when I first got saved, I'm obviously being transformed from a pagan into a follower of Jesus. And so I'm passionate about this, and it's like my attitude was more towards yours. It's like, it's all going, it's pagan, get Ishtar out of here. And from the church level, and what we're seeing now is churches will have posts that say, "Come take a picture with the Easter bunny at church." It's like, what are you doing? As a church, that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, that doesn't happen around here.
It doesn't happen around here.
Yeah.
Because we're pointing to Jesus. And so I get all that. But on the other side, it's like when I became a dad, I'm looking at the cultural setting of this issue. And it's like my kids just want to go hunt eggs and do all that stuff, and grandma and grandpa and all the stuff. And it's like, so I'm going to tell them, "No, we're not doing that. You're not having any fun because we worship Jesus." It's like, well, maybe I'm going to combine some of the cultural things with the joy of our Lord and not make it about that. So the balance is the heart and the people around you and what they're doing with it to the application,
But it is fun to run behind them shouting "pagan, pagan."
I might do that this year.
Fun.
I might try that out.
They're old enough. It'll be
yeah.
If they're still doing that.
They know me by now. They just all my kids, when I do that, just look at me and go, "Dad," because they know. Okay. Good on that one?
Yeah.
All right, here's the next one. I'll throw it up here after I read it. Can you, this is another Easter question that comes up. Can you please explain how Jesus was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Sunday morning? So the question is, how do you get 3 days out of that? Isn't the Bible inaccurate on that? What do you say?
When you're talking about these things, you need to understand what the Bible actually says about this whole thing. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bunch of verses here. Let me get. I got a document here. Let me get this up. So 3 days. There's only one place where the Bible talks about 3 days and 3 nights, and so Jesus in Matthew 12:40 said, just like Jonah was in the belly of the great fish 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. That's where it says 3 days and 3 nights. Matthew 12:40. Then Matthew 12:61 or Matthew 16:21 says that Jesus is going to be raised on the third day, not after 3 days and 3 nights. 17:23 says the third day. 20:19 says the third day. Mark 10:34 says the third day. Luke 9:22, Luke 24:46 both say the third day. Acts 10:40 and 1 Corinthians 15:4 say that Jesus is raised on the third day. Okay, in 3 days is in John 2:19 through 21. That's where Jesus says that you destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up again. And he was talking about the resurrection. After 3 days, Mark 8:31 says after 3 days. But that's in the same context. It's exactly the same statement that Jesus made in 16:21, where it states that it's on the third day. And that comes from the fact that the Greek is a translation from the language that Jesus was speaking. And so what Mark is doing, or what Matthew are doing, are quoting Jesus. They're just when they're translating it slightly differently. Then you've got Matthew 27:64. In fact, let me do this real quick. Turn to in Matthew 27:64. These 63 and 64. The Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, and they said, "Sir, we remember while he was still alive how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will arise.' Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night." Well, if it's after 3 days, then the tomb should be secured till the fourth day, not the third day. And the reason that I'm throwing all these verses at you is so that you know that what we're talking about is an idiom here. And so the whole idea of 3 days and 3 nights is not going to necessarily be a complete 3 day and 3 night period. In fact, let me read some. You know, when you're talking about Matthew 12:40, who wrote that?
Matthew.
Yeah, that would be Matthew. When you're talking about Matthew 16:21, who wrote that?
What does 16:21 say?
Well, it says, "From that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and priests and scribes."
Yeah, Matthew.
"And be killed and be raised the third day." So it's not after 3 days and 3 nights, it's the third day. And then the same guy writes in 17:23, "And they will kill him, and the third day he will be raised up." The same guy writes in Matthew 20:19, "They'll deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he will rise again."
So he's even using those in his message.
Yeah, he's not using a specific 3 day and 3 night type of thing. Here's the other thing with this: if guys fiddle around with this stuff and say that they figured out a way to get 3 days and 3 nights. This is how you get 3 days and 3 nights. You have to have actual 24-hour periods for a day and a night in between the crucifixion and the resurrection. Okay? So if you want to have a Sunday morning resurrection, you have to have Jesus crucified on Thursday morning at 6 a.m. So 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, that's one day. Then you got Thursday night, that's a day and a night. Friday morning and day. And then Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night, and then 6 a.m. the next day, Jesus rises. You got 3 days and 3 nights there. Otherwise, what you're always going to have is a portion of days. And so, for example, if you try to make Jesus buried or die on a Thursday, you got 2.25 days and 3 nights. If you have Jesus die on a Wednesday, you got 3.25 days and 4 nights. And so you're never going to get 3 days and 3 nights with the time that Jesus died. He died about 3:00 on the day before, on the first day of Passover. Here's another thing that people try to do. They try to tweak the passages that speak about the resurrection and say that he wasn't raised on the first day of the week. And so in Matthew chapter 28, in verse 1, it says, "Now after the Sabbath Saturday, the first day of the week began to dawn. And what they'll do with that is they'll say the first day of the week began to draw near. Well, in Judaism, first day of the week is the evening of Saturday. And so they try to make it that. The problem with that is this is literally a word that means sunrise. So it's not sunset, it means sunrise. There is another passage where it talks about a date. Actually, the preparation of the Passover was drawing near, and it uses that same term, but most often it's used as sunrise. When you go to Mark 16, it says, "Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices that they might come and anoint him very early in the morning on the first day of the week." Well, the morning in that passage is a word that literally is talking about the fourth watch of the night. And that's from 3 to 6 a.m. And you've got the same thing in Luke, you've got the same thing in John. And so Jesus, for sure, was raised from the dead early in the morning on Sunday. He was raised from the dead on the first day of the week. And you have that all through Scripture. In any case, and that's to try to, people try to get away from the half day by doing that. So one of the things that you have with Jews and the way that they count everything, you guys, everything, whether you're talking about the reigns of kings or whether you're talking about days like this, they count inclusively. And so if, for example, in that passage in Matthew chapter 27, when they talk about, he says, after 3 days I will rise, they know that Jesus is speaking inclusively because he's Jewish. And so they say we need to keep a guard on the tomb till the third day. And you don't just have this in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. You have it in the Old Testament also. In Genesis chapter 42, in verses 17 and 18, it says, "So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them, the third day, do this and live, for I fear God, and he released them." Okay, so if they're in prison 3 days, then he should have gone in there on the fourth day, early in the morning, on the fourth day, or whatever time is the period of time. So, for example, if you want 3 days and 3 nights for Jesus, you would have to have him crucified, and he would have to die at 3 p.m. If he died 3 p.m. on a Thursday, he would have to rise 3 p.m. on a Sunday. That's 3 days and 3 nights.
If you do that, though, you cause other problems when you move that, right?
Yeah, there's just problems. And so here's another one. This is out of the book of Esther. And so Esther tells them that she wants all the Jews who are present in Shushan, this is Esther 4:16, to fast for her, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. So there's 3 days and 3 nights. My maids and I will likewise fast. And then in Esther chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace." And so she didn't wait 3 days, 3 full days. And so again, what you have is an idiom there. And so whether you're talking about after 3 days or on the third day or 3 days and 3 nights, they're all terms that mean exactly the same thing. And again, Jews counted inclusively. So if Jesus dies on a Friday, I don't know for sure that he did. I got a good idea that he did. That's where I lean. But if Jesus died on a Friday, you got the day Friday, and then you've got Saturday, and then you've got Sunday.
Why do you say that? Because the potential he died after midnight?
What do you mean?
That he didn't die on Friday.
Well, he could have died. It could have been earlier.
What do you mean earlier?
So it could have been Wednesday. It could have been Thursday.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that chronology isn't. There's some issues there,
right?
That I've got problems with, and that's why I go with it. This is the earliest tradition.
Yeah.
The earliest tradition.
Because you're messing with Good Friday. You're messing with all that stuff.
Earliest tradition is that Jesus died on a Friday, and so the guys that are closer to it are going to know better than we do. In any case, any part of a day was considered. Any part of 3 days was considered 3 days to the Jews. And so that's the way that they count. And so it could have been on the third day. It could have been on the second day with parts of the other days included and that kind of thing. And that's just the way that they count. And so you have to know that when you're coming to the scripture and you're looking at these things. So again, unless Jesus rose at exactly the time that he died, then you don't have that.
Yeah.
Or exactly the time that he was put in the grave, you don't have that. And so if he's put in the grave at 6 o'clock, he had to be put in the grave before 6 o'clock on whatever day you're going to pick, then it would be at 6 o'clock in the afternoon that Jesus would have to rise from the dead. Right at exactly the same time. And so you're never getting 3 days and 3 nights out of it. Yeah. That's the point that I'm making with that.
So even throughout if you're going to communicate this throughout the centuries, it's by far an easier communication method to say 3 days and 3 nights as an idiom than to go 2 nights and 3 hours and 7 minutes.
Right.
It's just the way you would say it naturally versus like the specific time to the minute on getting that calculation.
Exactly. And there's only one passage that says 3 days and 3 nights. Most of them either say on the third day or after the third day.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Yeah. And all of those are in the same gospel. And so you've got other gospels that are saying the same things, but you've got Matthew in the same gospel using all 3 different idioms in the gospel. So
awesome.
The Bible's allowed to use idioms.
Yep. All right, here's another interesting day question. In fact, I think you were talking about this on Sunday, if I remember. But it says this: is the change from 360 to 365 day calendar because of the long day of Joshua or because of the near pass by of Mars thing? And then they say, what is that?
Yeah. Okay. Did
you go over these 2 things when you did the 3?
I did not.
You
I
just
mentioned it.
Okay.
So there's some interesting things with the calendar. The Bible in the book of Genesis, when it's talking about the flood, there is, it's really not debatable. The timing for the calendar, 150 days, and 3 months, 5 months. That whole thing, they're using a 360-day calendar in the book of Genesis. And one of the things that you have with ancient calendars is use 300, basically 30-day months. A month comes from new moon to new moon, or full moon to full moon. And that's where the term month came from, and all ancient months were 30 days. And there's some variation there, but they were all 30 days. It wasn't until about 700 BC that all of a sudden calendars started changing. And you went from 360 to 365, and then later on it became 365 and a quarter. And then later on, it became 365.249 something or other. And that's a Gregorian calendar that we use now. So why did the months change? And the deal with this is, and this includes the Egyptian calendar. I've read articles that said that the Egyptian calendar has always been 365 days. And I went and checked out the references, and they do not say that. And so if there's references that I don't know about, it's not the ones that they're quoting from. And so all calendars up until the 700s BC look like they were 360-day calendars. And all of a sudden everything changes. Well, something major has to happen for that to go on. And people can look back on these people and go, well, they're stupid. They didn't know that it was a 365-day year and that kind of stuff. These people were agrarian. They know when the sun comes up, they know when the sun goes down, and they know what the stars look like better than you do. They know what the planets look like better than you do. They know the times of year better than you do because they're all farmers. And so they could calculate a year. And so obviously, if something happens to the orbit of the Earth or to the speed of the rotation of the planet, or something like that, it's going to show up, and it's going to show up really quickly. When you're depending on the speed of that, it's going to show up really quickly. There's a couple of passages in the Old Testament that talk about cosmic events that are really weird. And so one of them is the long day of Joshua. And in the long day of Joshua, Joshua commands the sun to stand still over Ascalon, and the sun stays still for a day while he goes out and defeats his enemies. And so something's got to be going on there for that to happen. The other event is you have a situation where the sundial goes back 15 degrees. It may have been steps, but anyway, the sun goes backwards from the perspective of Jerusalem on that day, and that was right around 700 BC. And so the modern attitude towards those things is that couldn't have happened. That's just nonsense, and it's all mythology. But then you go back in history and you find out that the calendars are changed. And so there's actually something to this. So if
I heard you correctly, the long day of Joshua period matches up to the calendar change dates.
Nope, the Hezekiah period.
The Hezekiah period to the calendar change dates.
Right. And so some guys went back and looked at this situation and came up with some ideas about how that might take place. And one of the ways it could take place, it might have taken place, obviously God can do anything that he wants. So he could stop the earth if he wants to. And, people have all kinds, they get all kinds of upset about that. But you can slow the earth down. The earth is going about 1,000 miles an hour around the equator. That's as fast as planes go. And you can stop a plane. And you could do this slowly without sloshing oceans necessarily and that kind of thing. Or maybe God allowed that. I don't know. In any case, God could stop the rotation of the earth. The other way that you could do this is you could take the earth and not stop the rotation, but you could change the tilt of the earth. That's another possibility, because as the earth is rotating and you're changing the tilt, it can be this thing where literally the sun stops in the sky from the point of view of somebody who's rotating on the earth. And so that's a possibility, and that's one of the possibilities that these guys, Steinhauer and Hatch, and I can't remember who the other author was. It's A Long Day of Joshua, that's the name of the book. But they postulated that there was a close flyby of Mars. And so I don't want to get into all of that, but if you have a large body pass by the Earth, it's going to do things, and it's going to cause turmoil on the planet. And at that very same time, there were stones that fell out of the sky and destroyed the armies of Israel on the long day of Joshua. And so you're talking about something cosmic there. Something's happening in that situation if God is using the creation to do this. And so there's all kinds of legends about Mars being a fearful planet. Most of you couldn't pick out Mars if you had to save your life nowadays. But in ancient times, Mars was pictured as being fearful. And Mars, the god, was connected with Mars, the planet. And that's the whole point of this book. And so number of other things that we could talk about with that, but they postulated a close flyby of Mars that upset the rotation of the Earth, possibly the orbit of the Earth, and put it out of kilter. And from that point, and also from the point where the sun went backwards on the sundial, from those two situations, that's the last time the encounters took place. Mars settled into a somewhat, it's a highly elliptical orbit, and settled into its orbit, and everything continues as it has been from that point on. In any case, there's something weird going on with calendars, and so people have made that point, and that's what he's talking about. I just mentioned it. So my answer to that is there's all kinds of theories about these things. A guy named Velikovsky talked about Venus being a planet that may have perturbed the Earth's orbit. So there's all kinds of theories about that kind of stuff. In any case, we know that in the Bible there was something radical that was going on with the revolution of the Earth around the sun, or with the rotation of the Earth. Something's going on with the moon too, because it looks like those things have changed. This is where we get the 360-degree circle. It all comes from the same thing, 360-degree circle, and so on. And so all very interesting stuff, but you do have the events recorded in the Bible.
So out of all the conjectures, do you have a favorite?
You know what? I just kind of leave that up in the air. I don't know what happened with that. I think that there are a number of things that have happened in the Earth-Moon system that are pretty interesting. So we've had things happen on this planet that we have never seen. So we're living on top of a mile of lava right now, and that whole area of lava stretches from Spokane down to the middle of Oregon, from the Cascades all the way over to the far side of Idaho. And we don't have any volcanoes in this area. And so the Earth literally cracked. So something cracked the Earth. You have a large place on Mars where you have exactly the same thing, large cracks on Mars. You have the same thing on the moon. The whole side of the moon that faces us, all the dark spots on the moon, we call them Maria. And they are lava plains where the moon cracked on one side, because you don't have the same thing on the other side. The other side is highly cratered. This side is cratered plus busted open places. And so what the evolutionists like to do is put that back better than 1 billion years ago, 3 billion years ago, and that kind of thing. But the Bible doesn't allow for that. So this has to be within the time span of the creation of the world as Scripture speaks about. And so there's a bunch of stuff that's happened in history that these things can speak to. In fact, I think that the flood could have easily been caused by the close flyby of something large. And not that God didn't do this. I think that God uses the creation to do what he wants with the earth. And so he puts the planets, the stars, the asteroids in orbit. For example, all the enemies of Israel had an asteroid out there with their name on it. A meteor with their name on it. From the creation. That's pretty wild when you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
In any case, that's all conjecture to me, and it's interesting to talk about the possibilities. The reality is what we see in Scripture, and that can be something that God just did by speaking it into existence, or he could have used the creation if he wanted to. Literally in the flood, it says that the fountains of the great deep broke up. That's cracked earth. The earth cracked, and that's where most of the waters from the flood came from. So, anyway.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
All right, changing topics completely. What does the Bible say about paying taxes? And then it says this: my state is going crazy, and it looks like the legislatures are going to tax the people to an unknown amount instead of cutting wasteful spending. I know the founders of our nation had some problems with this, so what should Christians do?
Well, in Hezekiah chapter 1, verse 1, it says, don't pay your taxes. And again, there's no Hezekiah, and there's no chapter 1, verse 1. You're probably familiar with Jesus's confrontation with the Pharisees and the Herodians. They wanted to entangle Jesus in his talk, and they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And what they're trying to do is get Jesus in trouble here, because they're being occupied by the Romans. And if Jesus had said, don't pay taxes to Caesar, then the Romans would have come and taken him out. And that would be seen as rebellion. And Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. Oh, conversely, the Jews didn't like the Romans. And so if Jesus says you need to pay your taxes to the Romans, then the Jewish people wouldn't like him. And so they're trying to put him in a conundrum here. And so he says, "Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money." So they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. And so that's taxes right there. And so Jesus says that if Caesar wants his money back, give him his money back. There's another passage in Romans chapter 13 that talks about responsibilities toward the government. And it says in verse 5, "Therefore you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law." And so in both those passages, it talks about the fact that we need to pay our taxes. With the American Revolution, the problem there was not taxes. The problem there was lack of representation. And so if you remember your history, it was the cry at the time was no taxation without representation. And what they were talking about was that the English Parliament was levying taxes on the American colonies without the American colonists having any representation in the English Parliament, and that was against English common law, and it's against English law at the time, and the colonists felt that they were full English citizens and they weren't getting representation. Therefore, the taxes should be null and void at that point. Here's our problem: we do have representation, and so I think you may be in my state, in Washington State. The representation that we have in Olympia are subpar, as far as I'm concerned.
You used a really nice word there.
Yeah. And what's happened is people who like subpar people put them in. And that's the problem. And so if you have a bunch of people who want that kind of representation and they vote them in, then we're stuck with it.
Apparently they like paying taxes.
Yeah, apparently. And I know a lot of people who think paying their taxes is like paying a tithe. They think that that's how they're doing good. And so the government takes their taxes and spends it on whatever things, and it's like that. It's a religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're paying their tithes. And so they're forcing me to pay their tithes also, is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it may have started out that way, and maybe it is better in certain states, but it certainly isn't like that in our state.
Yeah. And so the answer to that is get better people in office. And the only way that you're going to do that is get better people voting for them. And the way that you're going to do that is by leading people to Jesus. Lead people to Jesus, and they stop wanting to rip off everybody and spend money on ridiculous things. So that's my answer to that.
Okay. Moving on. All right, here's my next one, and this kind of fits together. Can you explain your stance on talking politics from the pulpit?
What happens with politicians is they get in my lane. So I've got a lane, and my lane is preaching the kingdom of God, preaching about sin and about righteousness. My lane is about showing people how to live godly and selfless and caring lives. My lane is about talking about what a sinful lifestyle will do to destroy you and your family and your friends, your children. That's my lane. And that's what Scripture says that I'm supposed to be talking about: sin and righteousness and redemption, and a life that's well lived for the Lord. My lane. That's my lane. And what politicians do is they enter into my lane. That's my attitude. And so if a politician's going around screaming about we need to kill babies, you're in my lane. And so I'm going to let people know that this guy is saying these things. Lots of people are following him. This is not pleasing to the Lord, and so on and so on. And if somebody is coming along saying that we should take all this money from this group of people, take it away from them, and give it over to this group of people, that's called stealing. We call it taxation and wealth redistribution. And that's what a thief would say. Yeah, this is wealth redistribution. I'm taking it from you and I'm giving it to me. Or I'm giving it to people who will vote for me. And so I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And I don't care what party does it. I don't like it. And so, again, what happens is when the culture is going in a certain direction, nobody gets to tell me that I can't speak of sin and righteousness and judgment and redemption and the consequences of a life that's lived outside of Christ. Okay? And so that's my attitude towards politics. When I look at what the Bible teaches about this, you see it all through the Old Testament. You actually see rebellions by the Jews against foreign countries that have taken over their country and been doing unrighteous things. You see rebellions against kings that have done unrighteous things. You see prophets walking into the palaces. That's like somebody walking into the White House, walking into the palaces of kings and calling them on the carpet. When you get to the New Testament, you have exactly the same thing. You have John the Baptist telling Herod, that lady, it is not lawful for you to have her as a wife. And what had happened was he was in an adulterous affair with a woman and stole her from his brother and ended up marrying her. And that's where you get the story of John the Baptist being put in prison by Herod, and Herod finally executing him. Jesus talked about the leaven of Herod. Beware the leaven of Herod. And what he was doing was a commentary on Herod's lifestyle, on who Herod was and what his attitude was towards the things of God. When you get to Matthew chapter 23, there's a whole soliloquy, basically. It's a diatribe by Jesus on the rulers of the Jews. You're talking about the Sanhedrin in that passage, where he goes through and he rips on these guys and lets you know exactly who they are. In that passage, he says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, therefore whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. They bind heavy burdens. And then he just goes into it, starts ripping on these guys. And he did it with the Pharisees, he did it with the Sadducees. These are all the ruling, these are all groups that were in charge of the nation of Israel. It was a church state type of nation. And so Jesus had no problems talking about the political situations of the time. And he even dealt with issues concerning the Roman occupation, how you're to treat Roman soldiers. So did John the Baptist. And all of that kind of stuff. You don't see anybody holding back. What we have in the United States is something that basically has only been taking place since 1954. In 1954, Lyndon Johnson came up with what was called the Johnson Amendment, and that stated that churches or 501c3s, nonprofits, were not allowed to be involved in political campaigns. And it actually doesn't even state that you can't make a political statement. It's the idea that you can't endorse certain people. You can't take money for people and funnel money towards these campaigns. That was never the case in the whole history of the United States up until that point. That was not what we did. And so the whole idea of separation of church and state is a modern misinterpretation of a letter that Jefferson wrote.
Misinterpretation.
A misinterpretation of a letter that Jefferson wrote. He was assuring Baptists that there was not going to be a church that was in charge of the United States that was going to put the Baptists under its control. That's what the letter was about. And so when you're again looking at the United States, there have been Bible studies in the Capitol building, church meetings in the Capitol building by Jefferson specifically.
Prayer meetings.
Yeah, prayer meetings, that kind of stuff. We didn't have any of this nonsense that we have with separation of church and state now. This has all been actually lately in the 20th century and on. And so the whole idea that politics shouldn't be addressed in the pulpit is absolutely wrong biblically. God addresses politics all the time in the Bible. Whenever God is talking to a king, it's politics. Mm-hmm. Whenever a prophet is talking to a king, it's politics.
Isaiah 1, rebuke the oppressor.
Yeah, and so you have this all over Scripture. And so the idea that you don't want to do that in the pulpit is false. It's not something that the United States, the traditions of the United States originally had. In fact, we had pastors in the Civil War. We had pastors in the Revolutionary War, and they were fighting in the war, And so you didn't have the same kind of thing that we have nowadays.
So I get the whole idea of, church versus state from an unbeliever standpoint. They're trying to bring religion out of society. I understand that. Mm-hmm. What I don't understand is, why do you think, after everything you articulated, the fact that the government killed Jesus for the things that he said, mm-hmm. just going through the Gospels alone, you're going to breach these topics if you're teaching verse by verse, chapter by chapter.
Right.
It's just a byproduct of the information.
Yeah.
Why do you think that today there is this attitude amongst churches, amongst believers, that they go, well, let's separate politics and religion, and you don't talk about those things, and it's like anathema to do that? Where do you think that heart came from? Why do they even say those things when they're so diametrically opposed?
I think it comes from the most of the traditions since *54. Churches have been afraid to say anything, and I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, don't get in my lane then.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that we should be killing babies. Don't start talking about that and make it a political issue. Don't make the fact that you want to take children and you want to mutilate them for the whole trans agenda. Don't sit there and do that and expect me to shut my mouth, because that's not going to happen. And so on and so forth. We've got so much wickedness that goes on that it's just ridiculous. And one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years, I've always tried, I want to reach Democrats, and I want to reach Republicans, and I want to reach independents, and I want to reach communists, and I want to reach liberals, and I want to reach conservatives, and I want to reach all these people. But when it gets as wicked as it's gotten, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
It's like now I'm gonna talk about wickedness. And so if your party's wicked and you get mad that I talk about it, change your party. And I'm not even leaving Republicans out of this. I could go through and list you a number of Republicans that I've got a real problem with because I don't think that they're honorable men.
Yep.
And so again, when we're looking at this is a matter of substance, and it's a matter of actually quantity. So when I look at the Republican Party, it's got its issues. When I look at independents, they've got their issues. When I look at Democrats, they are voting as a block on things that God hates. And so there you go.
There you go.
Get me fired up.
Okay, this one just came in.
Uh-huh.
It's on spanking kids, and I'm just going to read it. Any counsel on when to spank versus to give grace and use words? I have a 2.5-year-old. Here's an example. She's not allowed to come out of her room once we have put her down for bed unless she goes to the bathroom. Sometimes she comes out saying, hey, I went to the bathroom, but she didn't. So I explain lying, but then when she will use the word lying in such a way that she obviously doesn't know what the word means, but I still think she's being manipulative and knows it. Is this a spanking event? Question mark. And then second part, is she coming out because I just need to give her more time? I feel I spank too often for too much, never in anger, only ever with love, and try to parent how the Bible says. God doesn't spank me all day, every day for the sin I probably don't even know about, but he does 100% spank me for the things I already know better. Best advice for 2.5 to 3.5 year parenting, please.
Okay. I'm going to give you advice for the whole gamut. And it's this: God disciplined Israel for wrong attitudes and rebellion. That's when Israel got disciplined by God, for wrong attitudes and rebellion. Wrong attitudes, what I'm talking about, is they're murmuring and complaining and that kind of thing, and being ungrateful, that whole kind of attitude. And God judged Israel on those things. And then the other is rebellion, when they flat out rebelled against God and said, we will not, or, we will, then they turn around and, worship false gods and get into sexual immorality and things like that. That's when God judged people. So the two R's, wrong attitudes, I know that's a W, and rebellion is when I've always disciplined my kids. Yeah, you're right. Your little girl is manipulating you because she wants to be up. It's like, I get it. Everything's happening out in the living room.
Yeah, totally.
You're stuck in bed and that kind of thing. So I get it, but
it's when I get all my questions and all of life's problems is bedtime.
Actually, what you can do is you can flip it around on them. So all my kids, every time I put them to bed, we go to bed and I'd pray with them, sing a song with them, and that kind of stuff. That's when all the Bible questions would come up, because they knew that I would answer them. And you know what? That's exactly what I did. I answered them. And I pointed to Jesus and talked to them about their heart and that kind of thing. I don't mind, having them up for another 15 minutes because they just want to stay up if it's all talking about Jesus at that point. And so, and there's an end to that too. And so, basically when I look at the situation with spanking, when they're smaller, that's going to be most of what you're going to be doing. And I felt like I spanked my kids a lot too. When they were 2 and 3, it was like, oh man, is this ever gonna end? And it does. It starts slowing down. The kids start getting it. And again, I didn't spank for everything. It's wrong attitudes and rebellion. And so if my kid was throwing a hissy fit, that's a wrong attitude. That's not going to work in life. It's not going to work with anybody. It's going to get my kid demoted and losing jobs, losing family, losing, and so that's why God does that. And so that's why we should do it too. And then rebellion is just deciding that they're not going to do what you say. And so if I tell my kid not to lie and they tell lies, then there's going to be consequences that come from that. And so mostly when they're smaller, they have to be consequences that the kid understands, and it's got to just be basic. Mommy told you to go to bed. Mommy told you not to get up, and you just got up. So I don't want you to do that again, and now you're getting a spank. And then you go through the whole process. Where hopefully what's happening, when I spank my kids, I'll just give you a quick overview. When I spanked my kids, first off, I made sure that the boundaries were clear, that they knew exactly what was going on, and so I always made the boundaries clear before they ever got a spanking. Okay, and so if they weren't clear when the kid did the thing, I told them, okay, I don't want you to do that again. This is what I want you to do, and do you know what's going to happen if you don't do what Daddy says? And they say, I get a spank. I go, yeah, that's right. Daddy doesn't want to spank you, so don't do that. Okay. And we go off. And then they do it, and I go, what did Daddy tell you? What did Daddy tell you that was going to happen if you did this? He said, they're going to spank me. And they know, right? And so that's when they get a spank, right? And then I love them up, and we pray, and they ask Jesus to forgive them. they ask me to forgive them, and then I give them a hug, and then then it's over, and they are restored in every way. They get to do whatever there's no timeouts at that point. There's nothing like that going on. They're just free at that point. And so that's generally the way that I did it, all the way up to the time when I stopped spanking them. I can't remember my son. I don't think I ever spanked him past 7 because the guy got it, and he's always been one of those guys that just does the right thing. And so there was a period of time where it was a lot, and then it got less and less and less by the time he was 5. Almost never. By the time he was 7, that's probably the last time he ever got a spanking. If then, it had to be. There had to be something he'd done. But if then, as they got older, I stopped relying on a spanking and started relying on actual consequences. So when they would do certain things and act in certain ways, there's natural consequences that you can give to a kid that's not going to overwhelm them. They're not adults. But the older that they got, the more there were just consequences. And, I don't know that I ever did grounding. I hate grounding. So and so I would take their car away. You get to walk if you want to go someplace, or have your friends pick you up if we're going to let you go out, and that kind of thing. But it was natural consequence. Let me tell one more story.
Yeah.
My daughter was probably 11 years old, and she'd done something, and she knew it was wrong. And I said, okay, here's your consequences. There was a party going to go on next door. I think it was a birthday party or something. I said, here's your consequences. You're either going to miss out on the party, or you're getting a spanking. And what do you want to do? And she goes, I'll miss out on the party, because she hated it when I spanked her. And I said, okay. So about a half hour later, she's out in the backyard. She's hearing everything that's going on next door. And she comes in and she goes, Dad, I want the spanking. Because she knew there was no getting out of the consequences, but she knew that there was grace.
Yeah.
After the consequences were done. So, and I wasn't hard-nosed about things. I was a strict disciplinarian, but there were times when I gave my kids grace, and especially if they walked up to me and said, and I knew nothing about it, if they walked up to me and said, Dad, I know I'm going to get in trouble, but I just did this thing. It's like, okay, you manned up or womaned up, depending. Mm-hmm. And, at that point I went, I totally appreciate that. I get it. So don't do it again. Move on.
I'm training them up in the way that they should go.
Mm-hmm.
This is a couple things that I see here in society is people think that they're nicer, that they're a better communicator, that they know how to do it better than God.
Right.
And the communication method that you talked about of spanking your kids, they replace with other things. Mm-hmm. And what happens when they do that is that I see kids that are in torment over timeout or grounding, and it's this long, drawn-out thing instead of a short event where we fix it, and then we have forgiveness, and then we get right, and we move on with life.
Right.
And then the second part of that is kids that are, and I'm painting with a broad brush, I get it, but it's like that works. And a lot of times the other parenting that we come up with, that it's nice and we're not going to traumatize our kids and it's not angry and all the stuff that the world does, it's like I don't see that being effective long term in a lot of the parenting ways that they're using.
I can always tell a guy who's never been spanked.
Exactly. Exactly.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I see is I never, and it got less with my third one, and my wife always says it's because we're more lax with our youngest than our other two. I see maybe some of that, but spanking was an event, and I didn't have to spank my kids a lot because, and maybe this is a mom and dad thing, mm-hmm. And the differences between the two. But when I told my kids to do something, there was a fear there. They didn't want to get the spanking. And a lot of times, we didn't have to get to that point.
Right, exactly.
And what happens a lot of times is whatever spanking that I see kids, parents doing where it's like, now Johnny, stop doing that. It's like, okay, they don't give a rip about anything that you just did.
Right.
You did not make it a big enough event. And so, of course, they're going to, and I'm not saying this person's doing this, but just for example, they came out of the room 10 times and they got 10 spankings. I don't think that means what you think it means.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because once, maybe twice at the most, my kids aren't coming out of the room.
Right.
And that's because of all of this and a godly fear that we have towards the Lord of maybe I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So,
hitting your kids is abuse. A spanking is something that's different.
totally.
And so if you're having to hit your kids multiple times, you're not making it an event.
Yeah.
Blows that hurt cleanse the soul. That's a proverb. And so when you're doing it, and it needs to be done right, and there's a place that God made for this.
Yeah.
And it's your bottom. It's not the back of your legs. It's not your back. When my mom would spank me, it would be all up and down my back and my legs. She would just go crazy on me, and that kind of stuff. And it sounds like you're doing a good job to me. You're not spanking in anger. And most times when these things become abusive, it's because the parents are out of control, and it's because they said, Johnny, stop it, Johnny, stop it, Johnny, stop it. I'm going to count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to do it again. And to 10 and stop it, yelling, stop it, yelling, and get over it. And now you're wailing on a kid at that point.
AKA your mom.
Yeah, exactly. My dad, on the other hand, was very thorough and measured and scary. I loved him, but yeah. And so there's a way that this needs to be done, and it needs to be done with the kids' good in mind, is what it says in Hebrews chapter 12. That's what God does with us when He spanks us, and He does. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is that when you look at the way that God treats people, He warns them. He warns them, and so that's what I did with my kids also. And so if I saw them getting into something that they didn't need to be getting into, or if I saw them going a direction that I knew, I could tell where they were going because I've done worse things than they've done, and that kind of stuff, what I would do is I'd warn them. And so when they were little, I'd go, Johnny, I'll just use my son Nathan, what are you doing? And he'd look at me, and he doesn't want to tell me because he knows he's not supposed to do it. I go, what did Dad say that was going to happen if you did that? And he would go, I get a spank. And I go, okay, don't do it because I don't want to spank you. And usually that would do it. And he would turn around and walk away from it. And if he went and did it, up I'd get, and go take him in. And every single time something like that happens, that's rebellion. And every single time something like that happens, that's when they would get an event. And I never spanked one of my kids past 3, probably past 2. My wife spanked with a spoon. I did not because I'm big, and I would spank with my hand. And the reason that I would do that is because I need to feel it. And I'd slap my leg first, and not with them there because I'd just scare them. But I'd slap my leg first to get a feel for it, and then I know what's going to happen with my kids. So in any case, that's how I would do it. Then love them up, give them some time to cry. They need to apologize to whoever needs to be apologized to, and so on. The other thing the reason I brought that up with I warn them is because you don't want to ambush your kid, and that's not what God's into. He's not into ambushing people. And so He warns them beforehand. And there's sometimes when you can't, obviously, and they still need to be disciplined, but that kind of stuff. But discipline changes as they get older. And what you're going to find is if you're consistent, that's all you need is consistency. And if you're consistent, then what's going to happen is they're going to figure it out, and they're going to conform. And the reason that you're having a problem, actually, and other people probably aren't, is because they know you. And they know how to get mom. So you just got to be aware of that. So
Yep.
I think you're good. From what you said, you're doing a good job. So
Yeah, amen.
yeah.
Mary Ann's on here, and she says she can confirm that Mr. Whinery did that when we tried to stay up. There you go.
Yeah.
All right, we are over time. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully that was helpful to you. We'll be praying for that. And if you have questions for Pastor Steve, here's the email, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text or voicemail, 707-872-7677. Hey, come on down tonight. You guys are local. Listen to Bob with the Shroud of Turin. It's going to be an awesome presentation. And then if not, we'll see you on Easter for our Good Friday service at 6, or our normal sunrise service, 6 a.m., 8:30 and 10:30 for Easter service. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful